everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Protecting Your Program in Students, Understanding How to Influence and Educate State Legislators and Policymakers. Today's webinar is generously sponsored by Burlington English, and today we have Robert Breitbart, who's going to share a few words with us. Robert?
Thanks so much, James, and to all in attendance, do hope this webinar is greeting you and you are safe and healthy. Really appreciate it, particularly in these challenging times, everything you do for those adult learners all over. You're in for a great treat. I couldn't think of a topic more timely than what fantastic job CT and Lori are going to do today. So I really look forward to tuning in for this. On behalf of all of us at Burlington English, it really is a pleasure to have partnered with so many years, to James, to Sharon, to the entire COA board. Thanks for all you do. It's really amazing bringing a whole country together with webinars just like this. And I tell you, this webinar reminds me of the time I had the honor of on more than one occasion connecting with our legislators here in Florida on the higher ed appropriations. And I will tell you that nothing connected with them more, it seemed, than helping them understand that in so many ways, of all the million things we do with adult learners, it's really helping them get jobs, keep jobs, transition to even better jobs, and to take care of not just themselves, but their family, and really be able to participate in their community. And we at Burlington English are super thrilled that everything that you would want to do with your learners to help them along those paths, well, we've got you covered. So not just with a few of your learners, but all of your learners, Burlington English. I'm going to show you just a couple seconds here of clips from Burlington English that lays that foundations. And particularly in these remote service times, if you can't bring your learners to the career counselor, why don't you virtually bring a career counselor to them, just like you see on your screen. Again, can't bring them to a job fair. How about have them participate in a virtual job fair? And these are screen images that you'll see exactly in Burlington English that your students will be able to participate in. Even concepts, even understanding that with you, you're more than just a place to learn English, you're more than just a place to earn your high school equivalency, but actually that you can and really help them for their next steps and understand concepts like career ladders, and then really drilling down to the career and the future career study that's right for them. And particularly so that they don't enter into training programs cold, giving them the kind of dialogues, real life dialogues and vocabulary. So again, they have a leg up and they can be successful in those IET, IELCE programs. And then lastly, whether that's getting a job now or in the future, all the soft skills, all the role play and mock interview, everything they need for, again, opportunities right now and opportunities in the future, we've got you covered. Even keeping that job, even dealing with challenging situations like you see on the screen. So once again, all of this comes together, whether you're using Chromebooks, laptops, desktops, tablets, obviously smart devices, smartphones, everything can all be done with Burlington English. So we'd love to share with you more. So besides myself, we've got dozens and dozens of colleagues all across the country looking to help you out. Well, with that, turn it back to Mr. Bonney and to CT and Lori. Very much looking forward to a fantastic presentation today. Thanks for all you do.
Robert, thank you so much. COA is grateful for your partnership, friendship, and everything that you do for us, with us, and for the field of adult education and literacy. So thank you very much. Our presenters today are CT Turner, Vice President, Global Operations and Government Relations for GED Testing Service, and Lori Kierstead Joseph, Acting Vice President, Adult Basic Education for College and Career Division at Pima Community College. Please welcome them by saying hello and letting us know where you're from in the chat box. And you can submit any questions that you have during their presentation in the Q&A box. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lori and CT. Thank you.
All right, I think we're good. All right, we're sharing. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for the introduction. Lori and I are going to chat with you today about the basics of education and advocacy. And so I know a lot of us have lots of different opinions about lawmakers right now. Whether you have a positive opinion or you have a negative opinion, bottom line is they impact our lives every day. They impact our work, they impact our students, they impact funding. So it's really important for us to acknowledge the power that they have, and good and bad that they have over our program. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. And just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to chat about today, we've kind of structured this as introductory course, if you will, or presentation. We know that many of you are going to leave here and want more information, more in-depth information. This is something we could easily take 2 days to cover. So we're going to have a sort of a part 2, and we'll have that available either through COABE or with COABE and Lori and I. But either way, we've already had some requests from folks. We did a kind of a version of this for COABE last year, and there was a lot of appetite for more in-depth information about the legislative process and such. So we'll kind of pitch that as a part 2. But to get into part 1 today, we'll just really quickly talk about why this is important, and then talk to you a little bit about the process. So you just kind of need to know the basics to get started and why you should get started. Then instead of us talking to you, telling you, giving you this information, we want you to be able to point to a poignant example. And so Lori is really going to take us through the guts of what she's been going through and the folks in the adult education community have been going through in Arizona, to show you a real, like I said, poignant example, and then just give you some tips along the way of what she's learned and what she's picked up here over these last few years as she's increased the amount of time that she spent in educating and advocating for adult ed programs with the legislature. We'll talk about how to get started. We'll point you to some resources. And again, we'll have some follow-up information for you as well. And so with that, let's talk about why education and advocacy are important. And so you'll see at the top on the right here, it's that old adage, if you haven't heard it, if you're not at the table, you could easily end up on the menu. So it's one of those things where if you ignore policymakers, you ignore legislators, you do so at your peril, because eventually they're going to make a decision that is going to impact your work. And so some of the things that are threats on sort of the reactive side of this is it's really about protecting your students, protecting your programs and your funding streams. And so there is competition that is in the market really aggressively right now. A couple programs that have been pushing legislation to get direct funding, which in the end will take students out of adult ed, will give them more money than you're getting per pupil for the most part in their programs. And then it sort of creams the crop. So these are students that are, at 11th grade level, maybe even 12th grade level, and dropped out when they were later in schooling. So it's going to be pretty easy for them to get through. Those are students you love to have in your programs and show off in terms of your statistics. And so that's something that can siphon some precious students and precious resources away from your programs. Legislators also affect your rules, funding rules, all kinds of different rules. They can put legislation and rules in place that can hurt your programs, hurt your students. So it's really important that you pay attention to, and folks are paying attention to legislators and policymakers in your state, beyond just the folks right above you, if you will, in your programs. On the more positive side of why educate and advocate with your policymakers is you form new relationships. Out of those new relationships come what we just talked about as sort of being the reactive piece. It's really the proactive piece. You're building those relationships. They get to know your programs. Legislators know your programs. They're more likely in the future to advocate for you when it comes to funding, when it comes to beneficial rules. There also could be other things that they're working on, bills with workforce development, bills that they're looking at putting out there that they wouldn't even realize that adult education is a component that could fit in there. And so it's really important to get in there and have these conversations, build these relationships in a proactive way, not just reacting to a bill. And then also, it's really an opportunity for you to enhance your reputation and visibility for your programs, for adult ed as a whole. There's a dearth of information with legislators. I've been working with GED testing service for 12, 13 years, and a lot of that has been working with legislators in states at the US level and even in foreign governments as well. There's a lack of information. They know that these adults are out there. They know these programs are out there. That's about all most of them know. They don't know much about the ROI of these programs, et cetera. So really important to enhance your visibility and reputation. And then also of your students when they get out there. What do employers, what do policymakers think about them once they get out there into the workforce and into post-secondary, and what they can accomplish? So then the next question is, okay, I hear all of this, but why me? Can't someone else do this? So it's really important for you to understand that it isn't like your state workforce agency or your state education agency. Sometimes they can't directly advocate for a bill or against a bill. They can provide input, But in the end, they're bureaucrats. They've been appointed by someone in the government, and they have a job because of their position. You all, on the other hand, are taxpayers, your constituents. So technically, you're the ones that are voting for your legislature. So they want to hear from you. They should be listening to you. And so the perception when something comes from, say, someone at GD Testing Service, someone at your Department of Education, a legislator will look at that, or a lobbyist will look at that in a certain way. But if it's someone in their local community who goes to the same bank, same church, whatever it is that they go to, they're going to listen to that differently. They're also going to listen to students differently, because these are students who they kind of hear some anecdotal stories occasionally, but it's really important for them to know what students are facing, what they go through, the programs that they're in, and then what they're able to accomplish. Really important for them to also hear student stories if they can't hear from students themselves. You all are the ones that have the most in-depth, firsthand information about adult education. So in many ways, you are the subject matter experts. And so when you're talking to a legislator who doesn't know much about adult education, that's a double-edged sword. Got to make sure you give them something that's a good, manageable chunk for them to understand, but you all have a lot of that information. And so you may be the only ones they're hearing from to find out any information about adult education. All right, so let's step back for a second. Let's just talk about the process, the lonely bill on Capitol Hill, if you will. This process that you learned about probably when you were much younger through cartoons and things is still the process that's followed, of course, at the national level, but it's also mirrored pretty closely also at the state level. And so this is just kind of a real quick chart and to understand how this works. So first, a bill, an education bill, usually if it's around GED or workforce, it's usually going to be in the education committee. That's going to go usually on the House side or House of Representatives or Assembly or whatever they call it in your state. Most states have two houses. One only has one, I think. So it'll start in a committee. And that's really where you want to start your work. So a bill comes out, it's going to be heard by a committee. There's going to be questions, there will be testimony, there will be a vote. And then if it passes out of committee, then it goes on to a full vote, either in that chamber or occasionally it'll go to another committee. But usually it goes from committee. Once it passes, it goes for a full vote. Then it goes over to the Senate side. Also, the same process may happen close to about the same time. So the House committee could look at it, pass it out of committee saying, yes, we want this to become a law. And then a week later, the Senate committee does the same. Then maybe a week later, the House votes on it and the Senate votes on it, it becomes a law. So it's really important to make sure that if you're going to talk about a bill or you're educating lawmakers, start with that House committee or the Senate committee. And then once it gets out of committee and it gets to the floor, it's kind of late. And so if you haven't given your testimony, you haven't had some kind of education, some kind of conversation with folks in committee, it's going to be hard for you to make progress when it gets to a full vote. So it's important to talk to them before a bill comes. That's the proactive side that we were talking about earlier. It's really important then to be on them, educating them, and advocating if you can for or against a bill when it gets to committee. And then, of course, once it gets passed by both, it has to go to the governor for a signature or a veto. So what are some essential things for you to understand? First, start with your local legislators. That's the easiest thing to do. So just do a lookup on a web page really quick. You can find what your district is or the district of your program if it's not the same district. Find out who your state senator is, find out who your state representative or representatives are, and reach out to them. It doesn't hurt. In fact, I always encourage us to try to invite them to your program, to meet with some students. COVID's changed things a little bit. It might be a Zoom meeting now, where it was going to be an in-person meeting. But it's really important to start with those folks. Then you move on to your education committee. So start with the education committee. Who's the chair of the education committee? Who's the co-chair or kind of second in command of that committee? You all will probably know this, but make sure you know who controls the legislature. Whoever controls the legislature controls control of the committees. So if the Republicans are in control in your state across the legislature or in the House or in the Assembly, then that means the chair is going to be that same party. And the co-chair may be the opposite party, maybe someone in the same party. That's just basically find out who the chair, co-chairs are, the leaderships of the education committee. And those are the next ring of folks you're going to want to go to and start having conversations about or having conversations with. Also understand that these folks are setting their legislative agenda at the very beginning of the session. So right now, hot and heavy, people are still in the process of developing bills. They're already starting to be heard, passed out of committee. So now is that time of year that's really, really busy. The best time to talk with your legislators, if it isn't about a specific bill and you're just having a conversation, talk to them in their district or talk to them before the legislative session starts or after the legislative session is over. If you know there's a bill coming or you want to talk about a specific bill, just do it as early as you can in the legislative process. And so we talked about this one. If a bill's coming out of committee, probably has a good chance to pass, or it's not, its fate has been determined. So make sure you're talking when it's still in committee. We talked about that one. Okay, here are just some tips real quick before I hand this over to Lori. This is just some tips we developed when talking with policymakers. If you're new to doing this, or you haven't done this very much before. First thing I would say is make sure that you're prepared for an elevator pitch, if you will. And I know that might be a dirty term to some of you, but just think about it in this way. If I'm talking to someone and they only are going to give me 2 or 3 minutes, what am I going to say to them? What do I need to make sure they hear? Are they going to, they need to see me as credible. They need to, for me to convey 1, 2, 3 maximum key points to them in that couple of minutes that you're chatting with them. It's occasional that you'll go and you'll want to talk to a legislator. They may be in session. It may be really busy for them. And it may be something where someone comes off of the floor when discussion's going on and they're sitting actually in a lobby with you or standing, and they give you 2 minutes. And so just make sure you're kind of prepared for that. What's that kind of key points to get across to them? For the most part, you're going to set up a meeting with them. You're going to have a little more time. You're probably going to expect around maybe 20 to 30 minutes on average. They'll probably give you about the 20-minute mark. Occasionally they'll get pulled away and they won't give you the full 20 minutes. So kind of be prepared for that 10 to 12 version and then the 20 to 30-minute version of a conversation with them. Make sure you have talking points and make sure you practice your talking points because you want to be cogent, you want to be clear with what you're saying, and you want to keep it at a high level and be really pointed about that conversation. Legislators are bombarded. If you think about all of the bills that come across and all of the topics that are out there, most of them know very little about adult education. And sometimes what they know is very outdated. And so it's really important to keep it at a level for them to understand what are your key talking points. And then this is kind of the next one here, goes along with this, is you do so many things in adult education. You have people who, really can't read. You have people at a 3rd grade reading level. You have people who just, something happened in high school and they're going to get through your program in 3 months, right? And there are all these programs in between. And we have all of these acronyms that come with it, right? And all these programs we could talk about, and they're just going to get lost. And so it's really important to think about what are they thinking about. And for better or worse, a lot of time the statistic these lawmakers are looking at is how many people are getting a diploma, right? A high school equivalency or GED credential in my state. What did it look like last year? What's the trend look like? How can we get more people a diploma? And so that it's going to take 6 years for some people to even get to that point. So instead of frustrating them, getting them confused in all of the different programs that are going on, just think about the things that are driving them, what's important to them, and then take them from that down to your next rung of conversation. Then the next time you can chat with them, you can give them more detail and you can educate them over time. But it's very visceral. There's lots of things going on. So you just have to be really pointed about what you want to say to them. All right, with that, we'll turn it over to Lori and she'll bring us a poignant example here and share how to get started. Lori.
Thanks, CT, and thanks to COABE and Burlington English. I'm thrilled to be here. I just want to talk about 3 roles I have before I jump into my story. So my name is Lori Kierstead Joseph. I am a program director at Piedmont Community College's Adult Ed program in Tucson, Arizona. I also serve on the COABE board. I'm the regional rep for Region 5 on the COABE board, so I have that connection. And then I also have stayed active with our state Adult Ed Association and active on their awareness committee. And so that's sort of the context for maybe how I got involved with this kind of awareness building work. I want to start with the context in Arizona a little bit and point out that that in Arizona, adult ed has been level funded at the state level since 1997, with the exception of 3 years when we were zeroed out entirely. So it probably goes without saying that we have a pretty fiscally conservative legislature, and every year that we receive level funding feels like a bit of a win. We do have that super strong state association, our Arizona Association for Lifelong Learning, that has a long history of developing student voice, awareness building, connecting with our legislators with days at the Capitol and things like that, and also working in partnership to support our state adult ed office. So last year and this year, thankfully, our governor's office budget did actually propose a slight increase in adult ed funding, which you can imagine was pretty unusual. The goal of that funding to draw down the increase in federal dollars, but we weren't yet seeing that increase reflected on the legislative budget drafts. So headed into these legislative sessions, really our mind was on budget and can we get that, $364,000 to draw down the federal dollars. But then there were these vendor bills like CT mentioned. So we started to hear about a couple of different vendors who were coming in and proposing to do some alternative adult ed model. One is kind of an adult ed high school. The other one is an online workforce diploma model. And they had lobbying teams behind them who were talking about the 700,000 Arizona adults who really needed a high school diploma. And really each bill was getting more attention than I would have expected. And each bill was seeking more funding per student than our adult ed system has ever gotten. And in some cases, a larger total allocation to serve a few hundred students than we are getting in Arizona to serve thousands. As I watched testimony, the lobbyists for these bills were touting, their company, whichever organization they were with, their ability to turn out graduates and their unique ability to interface with the workforce system. They were talking about really high success rates without really sharing the data. In actuality, what they were doing mostly was talking about how the adult ed system wasn't quite handling it. And they were discrediting us and the GED test and GED graduates. And so we really began to see that these bills were a real threat to our system as a whole, and maybe even to our funding in the long term. So as we watched these committee hearings, as I watched them, it became really clear that we were going to have to ramp up our awareness building efforts to make sure our legislators understood more about how awesome our adult ed system really is, right? We're sort of invisible to them, and we had to get the word out. And we needed them to understand how integral and how tied we are with the workforce development system. And I have to tell you, as a COABE regional rep, I had heard of some of these vendors being extremely successful in other states in getting funding, sometimes even at the expense of the adult ed programs. So I felt personally compelled to get involved in my roles as a program leader and on the state and COABE board. But I want to confess, and one of the reasons I'm thrilled to be here today and thankful that CT brought me in is that I'm not somebody who has always been sort of civically active or politically active in any way. I'm kind of shy. I didn't know a lot about the system. But as I began to pay attention to what was happening, I felt compelled to begin to speak up and to understand better how to help our legislators understand who we are in adult ed and how great our work is and what a great job we're doing. So I began to explore how I could personally speak up and how I could work with our state association and others to get the word out. So in these next few slides, I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that we've taken in Arizona, some of these lessons learned, things that I've learned and that we've learned along the way. And some of the slides have a lot of words. They're meant to be a reference after the fact as well. I'm just going to keep telling my story, and we'll get through these slides and you'll have them as a tool afterwards as well. So the first step, first and foremost, in any awareness building has got to be about relationships, building relationships, strengthening the relationships you have, connecting with people you know and making sure they understand adult ed. So first and foremost, we made sure as we faced this threat at the state level that everyone in our education system, all of our partners, were aware of the threat and of this disparaging of adult ed that was happening and of the potential threat to our system. So we talked with our state office, of course, but also with local program leaders, with K-12 partners and higher ed partners. We reached out to collaborators and colleagues on the Workforce Development Board and in our workforce system in Arizona. I want to note that it's been particularly impactful in Arizona to keep our college partners and our workforce partners informed. Personally, I would say the relationship with my college's government relations team has been pivotal in keeping this threat on the radar with the college leadership at my college, and in thinking with me about how to respond. And the heightened awareness of my college rep and my college leadership has brought the awareness to actually all of the leaders at the community colleges in Arizona. This year, we were able to present to all of the CEOs of the community colleges in Arizona, and they have agreed to stand with adult ed in opposition to these vendor bills when they come along. That felt huge, and what a great way to leverage those relationships. And then as CT was laying out, we began also to work on the relationships with our elected officials, right? We talked with all of our friends, those legislators who do know adult ed, right? We all have a couple, and they're already supporters, but we wanted to get them caught up on what we were seeing and hearing so that they could continue to be supporters and help us. We also, our government relations team at the college, just like CT said, recommended we meet with all of the folks on the House Education Committee, starting with the chair of the committee. I might note the chair of the committee is the sponsor of this year's bill that I'm pushing back against. So that's been a delicate dance, but it's been also a really good dialogue. And she's become a real supporter of adult ed, which has been really great to see. She's talking about adult ed funding now in ways that we hadn't seen before. We set out even before the session started to meet with her and to meet with others on the House Ed Committee to make sure that they had heard about adult ed and to share concerns we had about the threat of this vendor bill. I will say I partnered with my college's in-house lobbyist to for some of these meetings, and that has really helped me be the subject matter expert while she's being the lobbyist, and has taught me how I really can speak up and say, here's from the adult ed perspective the concern we have here. I want to note that actually the relationship with the community colleges across the state has led to engaging their lobbying team for the community colleges, and that lobbying team has opened some doors to meet with House and Senate staff and members as well in ways that we couldn't have. So leverage those relationships, talk to all of your partners, help them see what you're seeing about this kind of a concern or need. The second step is really about being clear on your message. So on the next slide, I just want to note that you want to be thinking as you go into this, what are our messages? You want to get everyone who's working with you on this on the same page. I'll say in Arizona, our messaging overall was we need to help them understand how strong and successful the adult ed system is in Arizona, right? We consistently rank in top 10 when we compare with other states. We need our legislature to know that. In talking with our lobbying team and the cost per student comparing adult ed system versus what was being proposed in this vendor bill, they made it clear we have got to talk about how cost effective adult ed is. So that's part of our pitch this year. We talk about the high levels of accountability. You all know how hard we all work with standardized assessments and the rigorous performance accountability system. We want to make sure they understand that we are accountable. And based on what we were hearing from our from these vendor lobbyists, we wanted them to understand we are tied into the workforce system, right? We serve on the local workforce boards. We co-enroll learners. We are not outside of the workforce system. We are the workforce system. And then, of course, we wanted to keep laying the, I personally wanted to keep laying the message of we've been level funded for 20 plus years. Like that's a problem. If you're starting to say adult ed is really important, like remember, we haven't gotten more money for 20 plus years. So we pulled together data to support all of these talking points, state and program adult ed data, GED and high school equivalency success data, ROI data that's come out from COABE and other partners. And then we always collect and make sure we have on hand student success stories to demonstrate the impact if we can't bring a learner with us when we're meeting with elected officials. And each time we meet with someone new, right, whether it's a House member or a partner that we might be working with, we consider who they are and what's important to them. And we start out by making, kind of checking in, like, what do you know about adult ed? What can I give you some context, some numbers, some sense of what the adult ed system does? And we really work there to fill in any gaps that they have about understanding for adult ed. Once in a while, they know somebody who got a GED, or they have a friend who went through maybe an ESL program, but most really need all kinds of information about what we do. If you have the time, like CT said, sometimes we don't have enough time, but you want to make sure you're ready to share some stuff in writing after the fact as well. And then I just wanted to note that as I scheduled a bunch of these meetings, right, I'm just one local program rep in their eyes. I'm from my county, Southern Arizona. Whenever possible, I was able to rope in and bring a colleague from other adult ed programs around the state. So when I met with the chair of the House Ed Committee, I was able to bring the program director from her local program there. And that was incredibly effective for her. They were talking about, now wait, where's your school? Is it on the corner of such and such and such and such? I've been there once. I thought it was a school, but I haven't been inside. And and then they start talking about setting up a visit. So just be thinking about what do you know about the people you're meeting with, and how can you make a connection that will keep their attention and make it real for them. And then the third step in some ways could be seen as the first step, but really work to develop a clear plan of action and think about as a state, and certainly as our awareness committee at the state association, we made a clear plan of action that was sort of multifaceted. So I let them know that with our team, we're meeting with all of the House Ed Committee people. But then the awareness committee was also seeking and setting up meetings with local partners, local elected officials for their program, trying to just leverage those one-on-one meetings wherever we could. But then we also brainstormed a couple of ways to get the whole field involved, right? Like every adult educator, how can we leverage the whole field? And that really came down to, oftentimes we will do email campaigns, and we have done that before. We did do so last year, where we asked folks to write their elected officials. Many feel more comfortable doing that and need to do that on their own time, right? On their own device. But as a citizen, get out there and email your elected officials and tell them adult ed is important to our state, and here's why. And so we often will push email campaigns and even leverage COABE's Take Action tool for a statewide campaign. We did do that last year, and it was really helpful. It makes it real easy for folks. This year, we also layered in some awareness building and some steps to get folks more involved in what we have is called the request to speak system. And I honestly don't know what that is called or looks like in other states, but the RTS, the request to speak system in Arizona, is a way for all of us to weigh in as for or against any one individual bill, like from the comfort of your own home. You just get signed up in the system. There's a couple of ways to do that. And then you can go through and you can do your thumbs up or thumbs down on bills that you're concerned about. It's also where you request to speak. So you can say, yeah, I'm all for this and I'd love to speak about it at committee, or I'm against it and I'd like to speak about it at committee. Our goal this year is to get more people in to do the thumbs up, thumbs down. I'll tell you, the vendors themselves are really good at getting lots of folks into the RTS system. And so it really becomes important to have some show of force if you can get the field out to show, that there are folks who care about this. Last year, I used the request to speak system and I signed up to testify in committee the first time ever in my entire life. I told y'all I'm a little bit shy. This isn't something I've done before, but I was so frustrated as I watched video of what was being said about what was needed in Arizona and really implying that we aren't handling it. And I was like, I got to get in there and at least tell them what we do. And I went and I did it, and it was incredible, and it was easier than I expected. And just like CT said, I had a very short amount of time. In the end, I think they started out the committee hearing saying we only have 3 minutes per speaker, and by the time I testified, we have 1 minute per speaker. That just happens, right? Because they get a lot of speakers. But there was great Q&A with the committee, and they asked lots of questions, which allowed me to get in a bunch of the points I wanted to make. And it was helpful. It got the word out there. And from there, I worked with other partners, actually including our GED partners, to get an op-ed drafted afterwards, and to also meet with a lunch and learn with legislators. So just using my voice that one time led to additional opportunities to raise awareness. This year is a little different, right? We're being asked to testify remotely for the most part. There is some in-person testimony, but that process has been challenging too. So I've been finding my way through that. It's a multi-step process, and there are rigid deadlines, and sometimes there are time limits that mean you wait to testify and it doesn't go quite like planned, but I am still in there trying to speak up and use my voice. I just want to note that I did all of this with the support and guidance and encouragement of not only my state association, but keeping my local program, right, my leadership at the college informed, making sure I wasn't making a misstep in their eyes. They have other legislation they're really worried about, so we want to make sure that I'm working hand in hand with them. And I always, of course, keep my state office informed about anything I'm saying and doing as well. So,
Lori,
what?
quick question.
Yeah.
So this came in, I addressed it a little bit, but they wanted to know if there were any rules in your state that about lobbying versus advocating versus educating.
Absolutely, there are, and it's a state that has been vocal. Our state's been vocal about it a few times, actually, around some Red for Ed campaigns too. Yes, and so I'll tell you, there are a couple of ways we try to stay on the right side of that, right? We try to, when we're on work time, work equipment, in our work persona, right? Our publicly funded persona, we try to stay on the side of educating. And even I would say my college leadership has said, as long as you're advocating and educating and you're the subject matter expert, it's okay. I work in partnership with our lobbying team. And so they're in the room, they're the lobbying group, and I'm just the subject matter expert. The other way that folks really often do this work is they do it on their own time and on their own computer. I know I have some colleagues where their organizations are more comfortable if this stays with your individual personal time. And so if you're sending an email to an elected official, do it on your home computer, do it after hours. So you can do it that way. But any one of us at any time can be educating about what we do in adult ed on work time, right? If you're starting to influence legislation, then it gets a little muddier. But if you're educating, if you're saying, hey, I heard about this bill and you're talking adult ed, let me tell you about adult ed. That's just your job. You're telling them about adult ed, you're educating, and that's totally fine on public time. Would you add anything else, CT?
No, that's exactly what I would say. And I think educating is the point here, right? And so if you're educating lawmakers, maybe it's not about a particular bill, right? And so even if there's that rule you can't advocate, you can have them to your program for the most part, almost all states can. And you can talk to them about your program, and you can talk to them as a private citizen also about these things that are important to you. I think it's just important to be there, because when they have a question and something comes up about adult ed and there's a vendor there and they have this bill and they seem knowledgeable, they're going to ask the vendor. They're not going to ask you, right? So it's important for you to be there. So they was like, oh, I remember that lady from Mesa or Pima last year was here. She's an adult ed. I should have my staff, or I should reach out to her and ask her, a particular question.
Yeah, it's a really great point, and it's actually a great transition to the next slide. Legislators want to hear from you. They know they're funding things like adult ed, but they might not know a lot about it, and they want to know. So if you're meeting with them on a regular basis, if you're, as CT said, inviting them to your program once in a while, or showing up at a committee hearing just to update them on what is adult ed in relationship to what's going on, that education is just super important, and they welcome it. They're thankful to have those have more details about what we're doing in adult ed. We made this list just to point out, we all live in adult ed world. We think that folks know a lot of this stuff, but they might not know even why do folks really need a GED. I want to give a shout out to my colleague Regina Soot, who I've heard say dozens of times, there are as many reasons for why somebody needs to get a GED as there are people, right? Everyone has a slightly different story. And so often we want to get out there and spread the word that there are all kinds of reasons why folks might need to get a high school equivalency diploma. They might not have a good sense for who our adult ed students are or what or how many there are. They clearly don't always understand that we're part of the workforce system, that we are connected to our workforce development boards, that we are working with career training and certificate programs in integrated education and training models. I'll tell you that IETs and IBEST programs get their attention like nothing else. That's something they want to do more of and see more of. And they often have old bad data about what students do after getting a GED or high school equivalency, and they don't realize how well we're doing to get folks moving on to more career training.
Yeah, can I just chime in there real quick? That was one thing I think that gave everyone so much heartburn last year when these bills were up in Arizona. No one was there from adult ed. It kind of slipped in. People weren't aware. And then there was testimony given. The first round of testimony was from a lobbyist, and he basically spouted some old statistics, but he basically said, people in our program are going to do better because they're going to get a diploma, and then way better than GED grads. Employers have a lot of problems with GED grads. They earn a lot less money. Here's some statistics that Heckman rolled out, 25 years ago. And so that was really damaging. And that's damaging to adult learners, damaging to the state trying to get people into the system, the perception of the credentials, all of that. So again, really important just to be visible.
Thanks for jumping in there, CT. So just to move along, I want to just share a couple of lessons learned that I think we've kind of touched on a bunch of them. So I'll go real fast through the next slide. I want to note that all of these efforts last year, I don't know how they would have ended up because things changed when the pandemic hit. This year, we're still in process, but I can tell you that there's never been more conversation about the need for adult ed at the state level. So our pushback against, the Goodwill Bill has really elevated awareness about adult ed in general, and that's really encouraging. Some of the things we've learned, we've just noted, right? Many legislators don't know about adult ed much at all. I personally have learned more and more and more each year about how to monitor and the importance of monitoring the state legislative process. As CT said, the first year that this bill got proposed, no one said anything. None of us were there. So it's important to kind of keep your eye on what's happening at the state level. And I've talked about the champions, right? Like find your champions, leverage those partnerships. My college's chancellor and our government relations team, they're champions right now for us. It's amazing. Many of our local state reps are, and some of our federal reps are major adult ed champions. Even our statewide college lobbyist has become a champion this year. And really a key partnership has been with our workforce partners at our college. So the vice president, my counterpart in the workforce division, he's been a total champion in the college and in the state and nationally, really helping folks see the importance of adult ed. Most importantly, we're talking about sort of like what we're doing in this legislative session, but awareness building is done best when it's done early and it's ongoing, right? We want to be building relationships regularly and building awareness regularly. All right, there's one more. Yeah, so this is just sort of like a takeaway, things to be thinking about with your ongoing awareness building. I said at the beginning of this, I'm not someone who's always done this kind of work, but these are all things that we need to be doing, right? We need to be building those relationships in an ongoing way. Whether you're doing it in face-to-face meetings or sending data and stories about your program, always invite your local reps to your graduations or big events. They love it. Bring them in and they become champions. We didn't talk so much about it today, but it's really important to be developing student voice, collecting those student success stories, blasting them out on social media, but also engaging learners in meetings with elected officials whenever possible. There's a link on this slide. When you get this, it takes you to the student ambassador training that COABE has been supporting in all 50 states and really help in how to train an adult learner to do these to share their story in these kinds of meetings. And then I've mentioned, know your data, share your data. Some elected officials are swayed by the student story more than the data, and vice versa. Some really want to see all the data to figure out if they're willing to support. And then a link there to the Take Action tool from COABE is another resource and way to share the data. All right, and then just to wrap up, I shared early on, like this isn't something I came into this job comfortable with, but I think it's really important that we all begin this, that we start. If you're somebody who hasn't done a lot of this, it's okay that you're not an expert. I wasn't an expert. I'm still not an expert. I'm still learning new things day in and day out. But as CT said earlier on, if we're not at the table, we might be on the menu, and we really have seen that roll out sometimes at the state legislature. So this list is really here as ways to just begin, to just start. Look up your local legislators, begin to build a social media presence, and connect with your legislators on social media. They're all on there. Get on Twitter, they're all there. They're telling you exactly what's important to them on Twitter, day in and day out. Begin to lurk around your state legislature website. You learn a ton about how does the process work, where can you find out when the bill is going to be heard again, and who's on that committee. Just start to snoop and watch some of those videos of actual committee hearings. It'll motivate you, I promise. And just, keep collecting those student stories. Start connecting with other groups that are doing legislative work. There are a lot of them in Arizona. There's the K-12 group. There's a really great group called Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, who's really great at educating folks and helping them connect with our state system. And understanding the role and position of your reporting agency is really kind of that reminder that there are things that we can do as individuals, that the state association can do to advocate and build awareness, but your funder can't do that, right? Your state office can't have the same voice that you can. So we really need to be the voice for adult ed. And the last one, please, if you haven't been meeting with or haven't reached out to the government relations person at your college, in your school district, in your organization, please set up a meeting with them right away. Make sure they understand adult ed and the adult ed landscape. They know how to navigate these systems, and they can be a partner and a real champion.
And just to piggyback off what Lori just said, also in your state agency, even if your state agency can't advocate for legislation, they all have government relations folks or government affairs office. And so they might have things that can help you. They can give you some information. They might have a strong opinion, but they can't share that opinion with the legislators. But that doesn't mean their government affairs folks won't intake information or give you information. So someone asked earlier, how do you know when a bill's coming up and how do you track that bill? I think that's the trickiest part probably for you all, is because there are systems out there to track these bills for them to pop up when they have certain keywords. I think I know COABE has a subscription to do that. I think they're trying to put some of those big things on Educate and Elevate when they come up to raise awareness. At GD, we try to do that on social. We try to call out in a particular state when there's like a bill or something like that coming up. But once a bill is introduced and you have the bill number, it's easy to track it on the state website. You can see what committee's hearing it, when it's on the agenda. That doesn't mean it might not be moved from one week to the next, but at least that information is out there. And again, if you're not at a local community college, your state office is going to have someone who is in that government affairs space that can help you with some of that information, hopefully too.
That's a great point. Thanks, CT.
Yeah. And then back to, someone mentioned this earlier on, there were a bunch of chats that were going on while Lori was chatting, of course, and we'll have some time for questions here in just a minute, is have a one-pager, something for them to look at. It's really important. I'm a very verbal person, and so I always have to stop myself and say, I've seen studies that said in a presentation, people remember 75% of what they remember is visual, not verbal. So if that tells you anything. So having not lots of materials, because it will end up in the circular file, if you know what that is, under their desk. One pager front and back, or two one-pagers front side. Like once you get beyond like 2 pieces of paper, you kind of lost them, right? It's highly unlikely they're not going to read that. Unfortunately, I'm just telling you the truth. They're not going to read that stuff for the most part after they leave your meeting. So they're talking to you, but it's good for them to look and see like an ROI statistic, or how many grads are going on at post-secondary, or a student story, to see one of those things. And so Educate and Elevate, which Lori mentioned, there's a link into it in this presentation, I think once or twice. They have some great fact sheets, some state-specific things. They have good ROI statistics for adult education, why adult education is important to building the workforce. And then one tip I would give you all is, I've learned this one along the way too, is you have to marry the head and the heart. Numbers will resonate with some people, and that's really what they want to look at. but you really can't drive it home until you see someone like Marquita, or you see a student story, right? And so, or a short video to send them after to follow up. So if you tell them a student story and that student's saying, this is what I've accomplished, and this is the, pride or whatever it is that's come with whatever they've done, you got to marry those things that pull at their heartstrings, the things that they're going to remember, but you also have to couple it with some hard numbers. So just remember to do both of those things if you can in your presentation. And then once you're done with that meeting, you can always follow up with them, and I highly encourage you to do that. So, get the email address, you've had the 2-minute conversation, thank them for their time, send them that 1-pager or something else that you want them to look at. So if you have an IBEST program, or you have a program that couples workforce with education at the same time, that's the perfect spot to say, look, we're doing this, right? Like, we're not out here on our own, this old, adult ed that you think of where it's night school, right? And then if they want to get a job, then they have to go somewhere else and get this, like, we're doing the work, we're integrating this for them. And so it's really important. Lawmakers are really going to be concentrating on getting people credentials, getting them back into the workforce because of COVID. It's gotten increased attention. And so they're going to look somewhere to get those diploma numbers up, right? Their high school equivalency numbers up, and serving these adult learners into programs. If you're not there, they're going to look to Goodwill, Charter Alliance, Smart Horizon. They're going to look at all these other programs, right? Because it's a quick hit. They can fund it. Oh, this is an innovative program I'm going to fund. And they're not going to remember all the good that you all are doing, how much little you're spending per pupil compared to what they might be considering with these other vendors. And there's federal matching that they're not considering. And you just have spectacular ROI, right? And you're in these communities, you know these folks, you know their stories, you're helping them along the way. So it's just really important to marry those things and really talk about the workforce component and getting people back into the workforce as part of this, not just getting them that credential. All right, so one more slide and we'll stop for questions. So we're gonna, like I said, we'll put a part 2 together, and we'll either email it, we'll do it live, we'll figure that one out, but just be watching. Either COABE or the GED testing service. We do that once a month in-session newsletter that you can sign up for if you're not on the website. It's at the bottom of every page. Just again, you're getting updates about the program once a month. And so what we'll be hitting on this next one, this is just some of the high-level topics, is really around timing. So we talked a little bit about that. We'll go into a little more depth about when it's most effective to talk with your legislators. We'll talk about policy folks. We didn't really talk about them. So other people are in the policy-making business. You have state boards, you have other sorts of folks that are making decisions in your state that also are important to kind of keep track of, that aren't necessarily doing just legislation. More about preparing for a Capitol Hill meeting. We'll go into depth about that one. And then we'll talk about rallying partners and advocates. So again, you might be in a position where you can educate, but you really can't advocate for a bill. That doesn't mean you can't speak with someone about it and just say, want to present you with some information about this bill. Here's the impact here. This is what it could do here. This, here's some information. I'm not advocating against the bill, but I'm just giving you some information, right? And then we'll be talking a little bit about, and this one I'll put a plug in right now if we can. So one state has 13 ways to get a diploma. Lori inspired me to think about it this way, but one state has 13 ways to get a diploma in their state, only one way to get a high school equivalency. 12 of those ways are for adult learners. So you have 12 different ways to get a high school diploma, but if you take a GED test in that state or another high school equivalency test, you're getting an equivalency certificate instead of a diploma. Why? So anything that you can do to put the bug in the ear of folks in your state to get that equivalency off the name of the credential, get it called a state diploma. More states than not have it as a diploma instead of an equivalency. So you're not going to be in the minority if you do that. So that's just another thing I would put a plug in for. And then we can go into some more details about the legislative process, when crossover is, and kind of some key points in the timing and process, I think. All right, with that, anything else, Lori, before we open it up for questions and get through some questions here?
No, I think we've covered it, and I see some good questions in the chat.
All right, I'll let you take whatever you want. I've been furiously typing away to some of them.
Well, I want to address one that where I think the question is about adult ed classes teaching their learners about this process and how to know who their elected officials are. And I just want to say yes. I think programs do that. I think programs can and should do that. learning how to be engaged and understand who your elected officials are and what the process is a great lesson to integrate into your adult ed classes. And there are resources out there on how to do that if you haven't done that before. So absolutely, learners we can teach learners about how does a bill become a law and how do you talk to your elected officials.
There was a question about that registration process to speak, Lori. That's unique to Arizona, but I'll tell you, all states have some version of that, right? And COVID's really kind of messed with things. Used to be you just go early and you sign up on a sheet before the committee meeting and you could speak. You can't usually just show up to a committee meeting and speak. You usually have to sign up. Don't be afraid. Reach out to your legislator's office. Just say, hey, I want to know how do I speak committee on a bill? They will tell you, they will be helpful. Don't be afraid, don't be bashful. That's what they do, that's what they're there for. Lots of people contact them asking them questions like that.
Great point. I saw another question and I just lost it. Oh, somebody asked, do you have any information on how private for-profit adult ed entities are able to secure funding? And I just have to share that I had a staffer say to me, I think that this vendor bill has had more lobbying dollars behind it than the whole adult ed state allocation each year in Arizona. They just are really good lobbyists.
Yeah, and if that question is about how the mechanism for how they're getting the funding, that depends on the state. So the Arizona bill specifically, they're doing it through K-12. So they're kind of setting themselves up as like a adult charter school, and they're getting basically like the equivalent of like a K-12 monies. And so they're getting roughly $7,000 per pupil. Imagine what adult ed could do with that kind of money.
And one of the maybe not questions in the chat, but one of the listeners said, that's interesting, $7,000, roughly the same per student amount that their center came up with, that is what it would cost to really provide everything an adult ed student needs. And I will say that this whole dialogue with our elected officials has raised the attention that, certainly $400 a student, which is what we're getting in state dollars for adult ed in Arizona, is not enough. And if you think 7,000 is a really good idea for this one for-profit, then let's talk about more money for the adult ed system in Arizona.
Yep. It looks like we have a couple students on, or adult learners on, so that's great to see.
Fantastic.
Well, I think we have probably many more questions we could answer and talk about, but unfortunately we're limited on time today. So I think I'm supposed to turn it over back to Mr. Bonney or Mr. Breitbart.
CT and Lori, thank you very much. If Robert's still on, I'll let him jump in and say a couple of words, but he may have just jumped off.
Well, I'll take the opportunity. There were lots of questions about recording and slides. I think you all are email. Could you speak to that one?
Yeah, so this webinar will be posted to coabe.org probably by tomorrow, and the corresponding presentation will also be linked to that webinar as well. I just launched a poll, so if everybody could take a minute to fill that out. And we do have another minute. I don't know, I did see a couple questions come in the Q&A box. So let's see.
There was a question about adult ed funding in general in Arizona. It's a 3-to-1 match. The state puts up 1 and it draws down 3 portions, or 75% from the federal dollars. I don't know if that's, do you know, CT, if that's standard across the states?
There's a match. I don't know if that's standard, actually. I should know the answer to that. I don't, sorry.
Yeah.
It looks like all the rest were just technical questions for me, which I think I just answered. So with that, I just want to thank you both again. That was a great webinar, great information. We appreciate it. Thank you to Robert again from Burlington English for partnering with us and making this available to our members. We greatly appreciate their partnership. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.